Hello, and welcome to our second episode of Talent Talks, the podcast for talent and people professionals. If you don't know already, I am your host. My name is Ben Sewell. And with me, he'll always be alongside me, as we said before, my glamorous, beautiful assistant, Dale Taggart. How are you doing?
That will never get old. I'm not too bad, mate. Thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks. Yeah, 2 episodes so far, and it still makes me laugh every time I say it. I even had to get my notes up to make sure that we keep that continuity the whole way through this series. It's what we like.
I'll be happy to be glamorous. Not so sure about the assistant part, but let's stick with the glamorous side. Silver linings and all that.
Well, I see that it feels like you're almost trying to copy me with the really patchy rubbish beard and the tash combo. So I feel like
it's funny because you can't actually see it on the sides, whereas actually it's just
the feeling.
It's really
The beardless bros.
Yeah, no, I've lost a bet, so maybe we'll see over time. I'll go back to being clean shaven, which is my normal thing. Not because it suits me best, but because I can't grow facial hair properly.
Yeah, I completely feel you, and I'm sure lots of my friends, if they're watching this and listening, they'll go, "Yeah, we know Ben has actually found someone who cannot grow a beard like him, arguably worse."
Yeah, worse. I mean, I'm more shocked that you have friends, to be honest.
This is absolutely
people that you
brutal.
Talk about,
brutal. This is my third different podcast, but thank you anyways. I've got lots of friends. Thank you, Dale. Guys, this week we wanted to talk about a topic that's pretty close to Dale's heart. It's a bit of a specialism for you, I think. You've spent a lot of time, lots of concentration on this from one of your previous roles, which was great. And I think a lot of that kind of based around the industry, I suppose, but it is very much transferable across, every industry, I'd imagine, realistically.
Yeah, I mean, obviously a lot of what I've done, I tend to always, over the years, be involved in kind of engineering, recruitment, kind of the labour workforce trades, plumbers, electricians, engineers, carpenters, of the like. And so I think naturally it brings it into it because you start to see these hurdles anyway, and you start to then ask questions and look into it, also bring back discussion about recruitment versus talent acquisition, and talent acquisition is really kind of to dig deeper to try and solve issues or see if there is actually an issue. And I think, look, we don't need to look very far with a Google search to find out. There's a lot of talk about addressing a skilled labour shortage. There's loads of different things there. Obviously, aging population always plays a part in it, where obviously you've got a certain amount, and you always get that in certain industries are probably, railway, for example, was very much an older workforce. So there was always that kind of sleepwalking. If you can't get the younger ones to back in, you can't make that an attractive industry for younger generations, then you're always going to have that bit of a seesaw where you're ending up too much towards one area. And if you don't take action, you're going to be in a bit of an issue. Obviously, Brexit does play a part. Let's not get political about it, but no matter what side of the fence it was, we always knew there was going to be, people leaving the country from other EU countries that, predominantly may have been in workforce in terms of skilled labour. And obviously, depending on what side of the fence you sit, it's either a good thing or a bad thing. But the reality is the reality. It has contributed towards that. So, you need to start then to look at how do we combat that? And I've been looking a little bit into it, and there's a few conversations. Obviously, I know people work at different colleges and stuff like that. Whether it's I think obviously people need to look into it a bit more, but we know out there that perhaps some courses are not as desirable anymore, and we're talking about your plumbing, your electricians, gas engineers, which I think it's an area of which we need to start driving it as businesses and open up the apprenticeship. I mean, most businesses of a certain size are paying substantial amounts of money into the apprenticeship levy anyway because they have to. But are they drawing the money out of it? Are they making the best of it? And I know a lot of companies will find ways around it and say, well, we're offering apprenticeships to our already existing staff, which is great. Me and you, we're all pro, investing in your current workforce,
100%.
that kind of retention thing, because obviously that helps us to sell jobs to people. Say, look, this is a company that invests in its people. But we also need to look at how we're bringing in younger people. Obviously I do a bit of work volunteering with schools for the Careers and Enterprise Company, and won't name school or company, but
of course, yeah.
Essentially we already know that there's a lot of building going on in East Kent, in and around us. I can look out my back door and I've got 3 different sites being worked on. But there's one near a school that I'm working with, and actually one of the site managers introduced himself to the school and said, look, I would like to see how I can engage, see if I can tie some of these young people into apprenticeships, because I don't think I'm going to have enough staff to finish this project. And it's a pretty large project. It's going to take a number of years. There's more than just houses being built as part of that development.
Yeah.
And you've got people who are managing this going, I actually don't think we're going to have the workforce to do it. And there's a lot of talk about how many homes Angela Rayner has set out for, as part of the government plans. There's a lot of variables that play a part of that, but you need to make sure you have those people coming in, because if you've already lost people through, let's just say Brexit, you've already lost people, you lose people through just retirement, and you don't have enough people coming through of a younger age and doing these apprenticeships or doing these courses at college and learning the trade and getting into the trades. I mean, it's simple maths, right? You're just not going to have enough people, and especially if you're upskilling a certain thing. And, I think I have certain other viewpoints as well. I think, we live in a social media age, which we can't mock. This is how we're choosing to use our medium.
Exactly.
But it perhaps makes certain professions not so attractive. And, maybe... people are looking at the finances as well and thinking, oh, well, most people on this is the median salary and this is where I'm looking. Because, yes, there's people that make a lot of money in these trades. They go out and they're a solo, entrepreneur, and they build businesses and whatever else. Of course, that's not everyone's cup of tea. Some people want to work in a profession, go to work every day and gradually work their way up. They're not interested in being their own boss and, stuff like that. So there's so many variables, but I think it's very key that we, as organisations, as talent acquisition teams, that we push that, the idea to bring in some more young people. And how do we do that? Well, apprenticeships are one way. Certainly, certain trades you do need to have a qualification. You do need to be certified to do that. So, of course, an apprenticeship, it's one way to sell it, because people still get paid whilst they do it. I mean, there's some really good apprenticeships out there where I see people, getting paid, in the 20s, 20 odd £1,000 to be learning at the same time. And I think that can be very desirable to a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, 18-year-old, in addition to them already thinking, maybe I don't want to go to university. Now, let's not talk about I made the mistake of going on to look at how much I owe the student loans company. I'd advise anyone who's done a degree, and obviously I've went and did a master's as well. Don't look at how much you owe, because you'll be surprised to find out how much money you've paid in, and then realise the interest rate is actually meaning it's still higher than what you started with. But I think there are those things in there, isn't there?
Sorry, just to interject there, but do you think that is a bit of a blocker potentially from like the university course side of things? Because I do find that, and this is me personally, I have this argument or debate with my partner probably every other month. She went to university, got a degree, doesn't use it in her day-to-day job or anything like that, but she did it because she wanted to get a degree in that, and she thought that was she felt that was the best way to go. But for me personally, I had my place at university. I was fortunate enough to get an unconditional placement. So I was, at top of the class from that perspective. I was so lucky and so fortunate to have that. But I didn't want to go to university. I wanted to earn money. I wanted that realistic world experience of working. It wasn't full-time for the first year. It was still part-time, but I was doing probably about 55, 60 hours through overtime because it was all there. I was working in retail, and then I got a job full time somewhere else, and then obviously kind of worked my way up to, fell into recruitment and talent acquisition. Like I think probably 95% of TA professionals do. But for me, I didn't feel that not having a degree has held me back at all.
No, and I think, firstly, I would argue that Laura still does use the kind of degree, and anyone does.
To a certain extent.
You learn critical thinking skills and whatever else. But, I think you're right. I think schools are very much, they want to push. And I've found that, when you go to schools for careers fairs, workshops, depending on what time of the year it is, if it's this time of year, well, obviously, kind of looking at the autumn time, going into the winter, you'll find that schools won't send year 11s or year 13s, in that, because they're still very much structured. And obviously, my wife is involved in, schools as well. She's a teacher. And I probably should ask her more about how their school feels it. But, I know because I still get my school ring me up periodically. I should change my number, really. But they'll ring me up, and my sixth form will ring me up and say, "Oh, I just wanted to catch up. See, you did this degree here. What did you do? Did you do postgraduate afterwards?" And there's still that mindset. There's still that focus. And schools will say, "Well, this is how many people we had that went on to do university courses." And I think that's great for those that academically, are interested in pursuing that, and it's great for people who want to, we know we need it for certain professions. Obviously, if you want to be a doctor, you're going to have to go through that cycle.
Of course.
And there's plenty of other degrees where you need a degree. And I think, degrees offer more than the subject itself. I mean, I used my undergraduate degree to an extent in normal life, but I'm not doing that as a day-to-day, but I did use it to then go on and do a master's, which I do use as part of, when I'm able to. But, it's more aligned to what I do as a profession. But, for that, it's if schools can be pushing it in a certain direction, but we're not doing enough in terms of, and we're talking businesses here, and we're talking, talent acquisition teams and the like. If we're not going out there and highlighting that there's another pathway here, and I think that's what is great, as with the volunteering I do, we're trying to fill that gap, but we need the backup of businesses to say yes, and we want to support young people into this. And you can do an apprenticeship in absolutely anything. I think there's like 750 odd different apprenticeships now. There is almost one for any kind of profession you can think of. But are they being pushed enough? Are businesses being involved enough? Are businesses thinking more about, we've got to actually have some time to make sure this person has got it? Because obviously, I'm not saying taking on an apprentice and taking on and running an apprenticeship program isn't straightforward. You do have to invest some time. You do have to ensure that whoever's the line manager is, meeting certain criteria. So there's more there. But I think if you invest in it, then we can actually start to get ahead of it, and we can start to look at it. If you look at certain industries, again, looking at a housing association, or looking at, builders, those big ones like Taylor Wimpey's and your Red Rose and things like that. If they start to push it and say, look, we know that the housing construction industry and, kind of maintaining afterwards. So whether that's housing association, obviously they're still a landlord, so they've still got to make sure certain work gets done. That all requires these trades. From the building the house to the servicing of the house post to renovation of houses, because obviously certain houses get to a certain stage, they need new kitchens. They, and again, part of a kitchen, I obviously had a kitchen, done for, earlier on this year. I had to have a gas engineer out. I had to have the plumber. I had to, obviously have my kitchen fitter.
Yeah, of course.
It's, that these things are all, and that's just the kitchen. And you've got to think about the wider house being built. And I think, but there is a part to play for businesses to do that. And it's not a straightforward one. It's not, an easy one. But saying that, have a look on LinkedIn. There's a lot more early careers coordinator, early careers manager, early careers specialist.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that.
These are starting to pop up now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, in terms of, just to touch on quickly, like the amount of courses there are available, I think on one hand, it's absolutely phenomenal that there's so many courses, so much choice for everyone. But at what point is there too much choice? Because it gets very convoluted then. You have an electrician course, for argument's sake, but there'll be 15 different variations of that course, and there's this qualification, that qualification, this part, that part, etc. There's so many different bits and pieces you need that eventually people could be in apprenticeships for 3, 4 years, 5 years sometimes, still at that lower rate of earning, but they're pretty much qualified. They can go on a site, go and do what they need to do. Obviously, it still needs to be signed off by the supervisor or the manager, etc. But from that side, it feels like there's a lot of blockers, and that's probably what puts businesses off a little bit. I've worked in organisations where it's not necessarily the business; it's sometimes the provider of the apprenticeship are not particularly up to scratch. There's so many moving parts, and like I totally agree with you. I think the apprenticeship route for early careers is fantastic. Getting people in, getting them, having a nationally recognised qualification that they can take wherever they go.
Yeah, and I think there is information out there. Obviously apprenticeships, kind of are that thing. Obviously apprenticeships.gov.uk, and I've spoken with them a few times at different careers fairs, and this is not to disrespect them at all. I think that just perhaps they're not promoting it enough, or don't know, or don't have the savvy to kind of get out there, because we want to get the information to the young people, to show them there are different options, because like you said, there might be arguably too many options for certain things, but if you can guide them into what they need, and obviously an employer will agree on their set standard. They'll have that agreement because it'll be based on whoever they're in conjunction with, what college or further education institute that they are being, backed up for that qualification. So once, businesses have a bit of a clarity on that, then they're able to sell that clarity. But, things like the apprenticeships, the further education institutes and businesses kind of need to come together to have this, out there, because we're combating, we want to combat the norm. So I'm always an advocate of university, of course, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time. And I feel like I get what I needed to out of that, and obviously I thoroughly enjoyed the masters that I did, although that was online, COVID times and all that. So I do see the value in it, but I also recognise that there are other roles that you don't need to go to university for, and actually doing these courses, apprenticeships for them are there for people. So again, it's about supporting younger people, but it's also, if you can see that there's an issue down the line, if you can see that perhaps we will, have a workforce shortage in certain areas, then I know people will say, well, that's bigger than us. It's bigger than us, one individual talent acquisition professional. It's bigger than one, company. But it's like, yeah, but someone's got to stand up and do it. It's, and especially if you're a company that is of a certain size, you will have a bit of weight behind you. And, I'm looking at you, Taylor Wimpey, and who are building right behind me, or Kitewood, who are building right behind me. You want to offer that, and sometimes actually it takes one company to start doing it. And it's like, companies want to be in competition with each other all the time across their industries, and you want a bit of collaboration, but you always know there's a bit of competition, and you want competition for talent.
But of course.
People need to start looking long term instead of thinking short term on balancing books. Sometimes you have to start looking at 5 years and your 10-year plans, and even your 15 to 20-year plans to kind of combat this. Otherwise, we will be in a very precarious place, and it will make people like us, whether we're going to be doing that day-to-day BAU recruitment at that point, is another thing. But we'll certainly be in a position where we'll somewhat be involved, and we will face challenges upon challenges, and certainly industries that maybe can't compete salary-wise, and when there's a smaller talent pool, they're just going to really miss out, and we're going to really see some issues for them. So, but as I said, there is some light out there. There are a lot of companies who are starting to see this, starting to invest in it. I think look at BT Group. They, there's a few talks on them I've watched. I've forgotten the guy's name, unfortunately, but I've watched some workshops with them, and they've really grown a big apprenticeship team and early careers team. And
Huge.
it's a whole function. It's pretty much separate to their talent acquisition function.
I was going to say it's even a further breakdown from what we touched on last week about the HR and the people function and talent. It's a mini function within that. Of course, it is.
It's going to schools. It's the outreach. It's offering work experience that you build pipelines. Obviously, I've been running work experience programs, and it's been great when I hear that at the end of the week they're going, I want to work here. This is the job I want to do. And you're able to give them information. Unfortunately, a lot of those ones when I was doing it in the railway, it was, they were safety critical roles. So they had to wait a couple of years still before they could apply. But, there's that interest there and you start to get it. And sometimes it's about tweaking. Obviously, the railway is different to other industries. We have people who are rail enthusiasts. So you've already got those people that are interested in that work experience and working in that industry. But there are some people you just can highlight all the different roles that exist there. And I think we start to, look at that as well. It all comes into that employer branding thing, which obviously we can talk about, separately in a whole greater detail. But bringing those people into the business, investing in them, you're much more likely to keep them as well, and then that's great retention. So it's good for business, it's good for the young people, and it's good for our wider workforce and how we move forward as a society. Because we all know that again we talk about trades. Let's just go back to the housing industry. Obviously, we have involvement with a housing association. Did. But we know that we can't build houses without enough people to build those houses. They can't meet targets without that. And we know that there's a need for housing in the UK.
We've always got these targets we have to hit.
And the more houses there are, hopefully it brings down some house prices. Although I say that as someone who already owns a house and will probably maybe lose money in selling it. But if my forever home is a bit more affordable, then it does obviously balance in itself out. But so everyone plays a part in it, and I think it's really key for people to not look at it as a hindrance. And I understand why they do. We've got to bring in more of a people who are qualified to monitor these apprenticeships, and then if you do a certain number, and obviously you've got to be having Ofsted will come in and have a look and make sure that you are fit for purpose. And there are many variables, but I personally believe it's worth it if you're a medium to large size business, and even small businesses, depending on what you do. I think it's worth it, and I think it's key for the government to also push it as well, and schools to be on board, and apprenticeships themselves to kind of put that out there. But again, obviously that they are a government funded function, and then it's for us to also shout about it and say, look, we are already seeing a decline and a struggle to get these needs. How can we look at this? And it's for us to fight for it as well, those of us that see it and understand it, and then hopefully then you can start to plug that gap. But I mean, I think it's going to be a really, really key topic over the next 3 to 5 years, to be honest, within the talent acquisition space, and even probably have its own little split off, because it's more than just a recruitment process. But again, we know that good talent acquisition is more than just the recruitment process, of course.
Yeah, and I mean, just I kind of want to just throw a bit of a curveball here, because you're the expert on this, not myself. Really, I've not covered too much from that space, just the sort of basics, really. But if you're a smaller organisation, we spoke about the large, like your Taylor Wimpey and your big housing associations, etc., etc. But what if you're a smaller organisation? You've got 500 to 1,000 employees. You don't need an early careers, like an entire team or even one specialist. Your TA team is probably 2 to 3 people max, realistically. How would you function that? And how would you set that up? Because obviously everyone has to still pay the apprenticeship levy. You've still got that pot of money there. You're utilising it well from your sort of internal teams already, and your internal colleagues, employees, etc. But how do you leverage that in a way that that's not going to be, how do I put it? It's not going to be your biggest priority as such, because your priority is still getting every other level in, but you've got to supplement that with everything else. So what's your approach from that, and how would you go about that one exactly?
Well, I think everyone will recruit in some way, right? You know, they'll might post somewhere, they might have a small thing with Indeed, so you'd always have that outlet to be able to go and recruit to it. And I think I'd always point these businesses again, apprenticeships.gov.uk. There's information for employers. There's information for people looking to do apprenticeships, and it will kind of tell you, offer you ability to look into funding options. Understanding what you need to do. Doing the searches, you'll be able to find further education institutes in your area that will be able to do that. And once you've got that, definitely leverage, whether it's a college or, usually it is a college, but obviously let's just say further education institute. They will be able to, look at that and say, and, colleges and universities do degree apprenticeships as well now. And that's growing as a possibility, and definitely leverage that help because, like you say, and I said this where everyone kind of, there are different parts that need to really support it. Because yes, the employer has its own responsibilities, and it'd be great. And obviously we know they're not going to be hiring them en masse. A smaller place is going to have 1, 2, maybe 3 apprenticeships at any given time. And that's kind of help support them, and they'll have different reasons as to why they take that route. So they won't, like you say, they won't need a full talent team necessarily. They won't even, so they won't even get to talk about an actual early careers team as part of it.
Yeah, exactly.
But obviously, the early careers is that's for the larger businesses that can do it on a much larger scale, and they will kind of be able to make that influence and make that impact. And they can offer so much more because when I say work experience or workshops that you can go in and offer, it's not always going to be those people are going to come in, but you're doing your part. You're helping out and you're giving people options, whether they come to you or whether you just opened them up to the idea of apprenticeships and they go and work somewhere else. That's fine. You still played your part, but I think you're right with the smaller organisations. I think there needs to be more support from government and from their local colleges and universities to help them understand what they need to do, because if you don't know about it and you're sitting there going, I would like to, and then you look at it and it starts to kind of go, wow, this seems really overwhelming, I don't really understand it, and you don't have someone who can help and support you through it. You don't have a college that comes in and say, look, we will run your course, this is what you need to do, this is what we will do. Without that, you're just going to find people just going, no, I'm not going to bother doing that. And you need it across, from small all the way up, because it gives more options, and it helps out an organisation no matter what size you are. I think it benefits everyone. It's just certainly you need more support when you are a smaller organisation.
And that's the thing. It's you hit that on the head. You do need that extra support, and it's sometimes especially if you're new within talent acquisition or you've only worked in that smaller organisation for argument's sake, then you don't necessarily know all the information because you've never needed to know and utilise that part of it. I myself, I've worked in a lot of different places over the years from different size organisations as well. But I've tried to do that more calculated as much as possible, so I get a full experience of every aspect of TA. Sector wise, I've been quite restricted. I've done sort of hospitality up until recently, and I've loved it because it's a very fast paced environment. But even then, the different parts of that industry itself have different sort of focus points and priorities, etc. The early career stuff, it wasn't really, for me at least, it wasn't a sort of specific part of talent acquisition. It was just, I'll reach out to colleges, see if we can get people in, as trainees or, sort of at those entry level roles.
Lacking strategy really with that one, isn't it?
Yeah,
it is more of an extra rather than a whole pipeline.
Exactly, and the apprenticeship side of things, it wasn't a focus in that particular business at the time, but that is the start of those conversations, isn't it? With that college, that's the start of the early careers thing itself. So, if you are a talent professional out there, then you're similar to where I was sort of 4 or 5 years ago, and having those basic conversations, as Dale's obviously said, open up the apprenticeship route, have a chat with them, see what courses they can provide, speak to your head of talent and see what they're doing, see what they can do, mention it. All of a sudden, you can get yourself into a really exciting project role. And similar, I suppose that's probably how you got into yours, I guess, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think it was just more. I kind of, in a way, just fell into it. It kind of just came on my lap of, look, part of your role. This is obviously a few companies ago. It was part of your role is to hire X amount of apprenticeships in this area. That's the spaces we have. We do it every year, and that was my first kind of into it. So this is going back 3-4 years, and I was kind of like, okay, so and like with anything, I go, okay, well, if I'm going to do this, I want to understand what I'm doing, and I want to understand where we want to go with it, and what can I do to help it. So, again, this comes into the EDI side of things. Is we were looking at it and going, well, we're going to struggle to get engineers, for example. It was really hard to get engineers, and I was saying, well, look, you're already if the talent pool isn't there, talk about the railway. At the time, 11% of engineers in the railway were female. So you're already fishing in that talent pool. And if you want to kind of balance out your workforce, you want to have a bit more, quality in that area, you're never going to get it 50-50, and they're always going to be weighed one way or the other in certain industries. But 11% to me just seemed too low. And at the time, it was even less in that organisation. So for me, it was like, well, if we can get in at that early door, because the pipeline that already exists is a really, really shallow pool. So you're going to struggle to get out of that. So what do? You look at getting people who haven't yet made their career choices yet, but also at a point where maybe people aren't so indoctrinated into thinking things like being an engineer. Oh, that's just for men. Like, women don't do engineering.
Yeah, it's that historic piece, isn't it? And that historic kind of mindset of, oh, well, that's a male job, that's a female job, etc. There is, as you said, open that door early doors. Sometimes it's actually just creating the door. It's not even opening a door. It might not be there. Create the door. Knock that wall down and build an entrance to it.
Yeah, and I think, it was good because it was like, actually, when I was having conversations at the schools, like, I had some young girls say, oh, well, no, that's not a girl's job. Like, and obviously you get to challenge that, and there's certain things you can't undo. If people have a dad or a granddad who are, have a mindset of, no, girls don't do those jobs.
Old school mentality.
Yeah.
The widely known saying, isn't it?
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to compete with that. But I found that, if we can at least give those pathways early doors, we might have a bit more success. And, it was just small success. The business were really happy with it, of course. And I've obviously gone and done that, every year I've done it now in the railway. So I've done about 4 different cohorts of apprenticeships into engineering in the railway across 2 different companies. And we've had great success, in terms of wider diversity, but also to bring more females into engineering. The first year I did it, 2/3 of my cohort were female.
That's fantastic.
And, of course, obviously businesses want to run with it and say, yeah, that's great. Like, let's plaster this out there. But for me, it was like, okay, we've started to hit, started to lay some foundations here. We've started to change because, again, you have to gradually do it, because then certain things, because, there are old ways of doing things, and there are ways in which there are some, if you're used to only being in a male-only environment, you might find yourself saying things that are genuinely not appropriate to say. Well, not appropriate to say in general, but certainly not appropriate to say in front of a female colleague. So, you have to make those adjustments, and it's not going to happen overnight, but just chipping away at it, doing your part, and just making a difference. You got to think about it as it's not a quick win. It's not something for now or 2 years or 3 years. This is something for the future. It's your future talent pipeline. It's how people also perceive you. This comes into employer branding. We know Gen Z want to, look at businesses who are more pro on that EDI, front, and actually more of a, actually this is what we're doing, rather than we have a D&I team just as a tick box exercise, which we know does exist out there.
Yeah, very
But
much
you're
so.
pulling all those things in, and I guess this is what I'm saying when we talk about talent acquisition being that strategic function. Again, this all just aligns in because you find everything attaching to each other.
Yeah.
Having a good early careers pathway can really help those challenges in terms of an EDI structure, and how many issues you might be having there. If you might be struggling to get females in, or, struggling to get diversity in other ways, or, it kind of goes into it, and it kind of go, oh, okay, no, we actually, that helps that, and that helps that. And then you go, oh, and then you have a light bulb moment of going, amazing. We're starting to do that. And then you start to see other things, kind of trade off, and it all kind of helps, that wider cycle, that wider big picture. And I think all you really want is to set yourself up for success now, but you also need to set yourself up for success in the future. And it's just, I think the challenge is, to be honest, I think we both experienced it in previous roles, is to be able to get to those people that maybe make the big decisions and get them to understand the importance of looking forward. Not always easy, because businesses aren't having a great time in the UK. At the end of the day, finances are finances, and everyone's got to balance their books by the end of the tax year, to keep themselves tiding over.
Of course.
So that is a challenge, but I think as a profession, I think I'm really seeing that narrative being pushed, and I think we are starting to see the people profession more involved in businesses, and more forward thinking, more strategic at that strategic table. And again, like, it always comes back to discussions we previously had. It's also on us to push the narrative, and show that we know what we're talking about, back it up with studies, back it up with what we see, the data we can pull from our own systems, and being able to, when you get the opportunity, make sure you nail that sales piece.
100%,
because
yeah.
it does impact us, and it's more for us to not just look at recruiting people now. It's to make sure that the business is future proof.
No, definitely. And I think just to kind of add to that, I suppose, is, we do, as a talent acquisition team, you do need to get involved with things. But even if you are a smaller organisation, getting involved with everything from that more strategic outset is, if you are part of the people team and you have part of your role is, recruitment and talent acquisition, just talking to those key stakeholders and those senior stakeholders, and then feeding that back to your TA team. I think that's the equally just as critical part. If TA don't have that direct access, TA work with your people team, work with your HR advisors, your HR business partners, etc. So you work as a unit, as a team properly.
Yeah.
I think once you've got that nailed on, every company will start to see things going in that right direction. But it is strategic. You can't have that 1 to 2 year plan. Sometimes it's a 3 to 5 year, as you've touched on, a few times in the episode today. It's just making sure that whoever it is, if whoever signs off the budgets essentially, is invested and knows that it's not going to be a quick win. First year is going to be probably pretty rubbish, realistically, from that side. But the second year, you build on that. But it's what you do in that first year from that cohort that makes the second year even better. So it is that constant work.
Yeah, and it's just building foundations and building forward. And I think the hardest thing, you can do all the research, you can, get your business plan in place, you can, sell it all you want. I think the hardest thing is to show the value of it. In increasingly troubling times, you've got to be able to say, look, I know that you might not see the value coming back in, the return right now, but you will see the return in a few years' time. This is not a quick win, and it's something that you've got to be on top of. You've got to manage expectations, because you don't want it to get to a point where you get in, the business is maybe not in the best possible place, and they start to look at where they can cut some money.
That's the first place you look, isn't it, really?
Yeah. So you've got to be able to put yourself in a position where you are showing, and you're strong enough to show, no, you need to stick with this. You will see the reward. And it's good because there are businesses already out there that have been doing it for a number of years and are showing that success. Point them in that direction. I think that's hopefully will make it easier for TA professionals, and I think we're actually going to get to the point where we're going to see early careers professionals. I think that's going to be probably one of the biggest HR and talent acquisition focuses over the next few years. I definitely think so.
That's a big call.
I think, I think it's definitely going to be top three. Over the next 2 to 3 years, I think early careers is going to be in the top three kind of focus points for there. And I think, if we go back to, one of the polls that we put up, let's just have a little look-see of the last poll that we put up. So, candidate experience and employer branding naturally was, up there, but early careers was third. And you'll be surprised to know, 0 on utilising AI.
Gerald, we're sort of running out of time on this week's episode, but that's really interesting. I think we'll touch on that in a further episode down the line, because you and I are obviously big fans of it, but not in excessive use. It's more to have a foundation and a base, and then you build up from that. But that's really interesting, because I thought that would be a lot. Well, I thought it'd be a lot more votes.
I would have thought so from a lot of talk. When you look on, obviously we got our networks on LinkedIn and stuff. There's a lot of talk about AI, and not all positive. A lot of discussions around how many CVs. I saw one this morning. I won't say it's completely solidified, but everything's based on polls. But there was an article suggesting that nearly half of CVs in 2024 were created with AI. Now,
what you created
by AI?
Exactly.
But I think it shows that there is worry in our industry about AI, and we can see it. As light as day. I think it's always really obvious when you see a lot of Z's instead of S's in certain words.
Yeah, it's the American English, isn't it? Straight away.
So it is starting to kind of come through there, but it's not. I think again, I'm pro for any tool we can help us streamline and make us get better at our job. Always be open to, but I'm certainly interested to see that AI was not making certainly not their biggest focus. I mean, it might be a focus in there, but for no one to be saying that it's their biggest focus was certainly interesting. But I think we can always have a big old separate conversation about AI and the pros and cons of it in our world.
Definitely. I think we'll try and get a couple of people on for that. I think that would be a really interesting topic. Get someone else's opinion, their thoughts, and see how they've potentially harnessed it. But no, that is it for this week. It's been a pleasure talking. I hope you guys have enjoyed it as well. And any thoughts, any comments you want to make, let us know. Drop us a comment or drop us an email. It's absolutely fine. We'll pop it on the description below. But yeah, thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.